Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, helping higher education marketing leaders share knowledge about learning, strategies, and tactics that are relevant today. See what you can learn today by listening to one of our episodes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, hosted by Concept 3D. If you like our content, please follow and subscribe to us on your listening channels. As always, I'm Shiro Hattori, your host today, and I'm very thrilled to talk about demand generation with pre-college programming and why higher ed institutions need to know their CAC. So for the topic, I'm excited to speak with Brandon Busteed today. He is the CEO at Brand Ed. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Shiro. Great to talk to you, and thanks for doing this podcast. I'm sure it's valuable to all the folks who tune in.
Yeah, thank you. And I do ask all my guests this as a fun icebreaker. Brandon, tell me what you love about higher ed.
Oh man, I love the lifelong impact that can be done through higher education writ large. You know, you think about. To me, one of the reasons why I'm most passionate about it is because of great mentors that I had when I was a student, faculty mentors, coach mentors, people who I'm still, in touch with to this day, that I built lifelong relationships with, and the impact of what they did for me in my life is just immeasurable. So that's to me, when higher ed is done right, it's a lifelong impact.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing with me. I've mentioned this so many times before, but my closest friends and my circle of like closest 5 friends are all folks I met at a higher ed, and so or at my institution. So I couldn't agree more. Well, let's jump in here. Can you tell us, start off by telling us a little bit about your background and your role?
Yeah, sure. So I'm about a year in as the CEO of Brand Ed. Brand Ed has been around in some form for a little over 20 years. It started with the acquisition of Sotheby's Institute of Art out of Sotheby's Auction House. So we've been operating Sotheby's Institute of Art for a little over 20 years now. We also operate the School of the New York Times, Vogue College of Fashion, and Manchester City Sports Business School. And the theme across all those is just an extreme focus on industry immersive education. And we're doing this across pre-college, high school student programs, collegiate programs for undergrads, and in a couple cases with Sotheby's and with Vogue, master's degree programs. But what's consistent across all that is just a laser-like focus on industry immersive education, where all of our programs are effectively co-designed, co-taught by industry experts who are in these roles inside of these organizations, and by educational experts who are helping create really, really powerful programs for students.
That's fantastic. I didn't ask this question in our pre intro call, but I'm curious what like the day to day for Brandon looks like. I don't usually speak to presidents and CEOs and institutions that often on the podcast, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, look, it's a lot of time with my team. Certainly within the organization, working with the leaders and pretty much everybody across the organization. Spending a lot of time in our various offices and campuses around the world between New York City and London and Madrid and Manchester. But as you can imagine, too, it's a lot of time with your board. We're owned by a family. It's a family-owned entity, and so certainly as a CEO, you're spending a little bit more time with strategic partners, with your board, and some of those things. But I'm constantly out and about in the field, right? Regularly at conferences, regularly visiting college campuses, or working with high school leaders as part of our pre-college program. So I spend a lot of time trying to be in the field, not just with administrators within educational institutions, but with the faculty and the teachers and the students in those institutions. So it's a balance between some real, careful strategic thinking and planning and conversations at a board level, and a lot of, quite frankly, like on the ground, being in our programs. I mean, I always try and visit our programs as a fly on the wall and participant in the back, and you learn a lot by seeing what's happening in the student teacher or student faculty interface these days.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that you're spreading your time with boots on the ground too, because I know that's very, very hard to fit in. I'm
Yeah.
curious, you mentioned some conferences you were at. Was there any that stood out to you that was really helpful or impactful for you the past year?
Yeah, well, there's a few that have kind of become regulars for me. But the theme across them is that they're smaller events where there's more time given to interaction with the participants.
Hmm.
So, the handful I'm thinking of are ones that were no more than 100 to 120 attendees, and the meals were unscheduled. There weren't, overly ambitious panel talks with, lots of participants who were doing 2-minute sound bites each with no time for Q&A. So as much as I go every now and then to the really large higher ed conferences that are out there, the ASU GSVs, continue to be valuable, but the ones that I think are particularly useful are smaller ones where there's time during that experience to really connect with people and to have unscheduled and non-agenda time to talk with other leaders. So that's, I think, the big challenge at conferences these days. There's so much talk time, so much panel time, so little Q&A, so little interaction outside of it. So I'm always looking for the smaller ones where more of that is possible.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, let's jump into some of the topics we have today. I know one of the big points we talked about in our pre-call was discussing different ways to cultivate student population and growth, and what you've seen really works. So, can you share us with your portfolio of different schools what's really worked for you today?
So for brand ed, as evidenced by the name, one of the big assets that we work with are partnering with iconic, globally recognized organizations. When you think about Vogue and the New York Times and Manchester City and Sotheby's, almost all of those are globally recognized brands. And so we start there, right? Recognition and the idea that these are organizations too that have been around for a long, long time. They have track record, history, all the different things that give it credibility as an organization. When you're developing educational programming around it, it has that same instant credibility and brand recognition. So we benefit from that greatly, but we also benefit from the fact that we can curate just unbelievable world-class experiences for students because we're able to work with our partners in bringing in experts who are in various roles across their organizations to teach, to create hands-on projects with students, to give them feedback on those projects. We also can give students access to behind the scenes things that they couldn't otherwise access. So our students that come to our Manchester City Sports Business School programs are literally taking classes in the Etihad Stadium, right? You think about those kinds of backdrops for the learning that you're doing. It really is incredible. So, in terms of attracting students, we have that great benefit and asset of brands that are globally recognized, and then brands that are recognized usually for very specific things, right? If I say Vogue, you think fashion, and of course, one of our
Hmm.
most popular programs are Vogue pre-college programs that are being run in New York City right now. 2-week immersive experiences. We have had thousands of applications just in the past couple months just for that
Wow.
Vogue program in fashion. So that's certainly a big part of it. And as I think about higher ed, I know we're going to segue to it. Higher ed is in a position now where whether you're a college or university with a well-known, well-established brand or not, one of the
Hmm.
most critical aspects of success is going to be how early can you start to build a real meaningful connection with students that are prospective students, right? Where you build some real meaningful connection, value added, delivered to that student that's just beyond a brochure or, a social media ad or even the classic campus tour where, you're beholden to whether you've got a really dynamic tour guide or not. But how can you take some of the best examples of the college, what it teaches, its star faculty, and extend that earlier and earlier in the cycle? If I can make a connection with an 8th grader or a 9th grader for somebody that's going to be thinking about me as an institution 4 or 5 years later, that's going to be a really big part of the ball game going forward, especially with, as you know, and most of the listeners know, the population age demographic cliff that is now officially upon us as of this fall.
No, that's a really good point, and I like that you mentioned eighth, ninth grade, because I do think um, there's research that shows that students are now prospective students are doing their research and identifying with certain brands or institutions earlier on than, let's say, I did over a decade ago. And so I like that you're understanding your market as well.
Yeah, and I think look, there's a term too that I know some college universities are really starting to think carefully about, but it's experiential marketing, right? How can you, in a retail setting, for example, experiential marketing has been a highly effective new strategy, right? How can you
Hmm.
create experiences that people then attach to your brand, right, and keep coming back for more? I think college universities are actually in an incredible position of strength to take advantage of experiential marketing. They just aren't doing it very much yet. So I'm hopeful for the future. There's great examples from the business world that I think higher ed can learn from. And I think certainly some early adopter colleges and universities, they're already well down that path. And it's showing up. It's showing up in their number of applications, and more importantly, in their yield. The students who get in are much more likely to, choose to matriculate there compared to other offers because they've had some meaningful association or attachment or experience with that institution.
Oh, that's so amazing. Do you mind sharing, just like, I know you have a bunch of amazing programs all the way from pre-college to masters, right? Can you just share one program that comes top of mind right now, just to have our listeners kind of get a better idea of what the school and programs are like?
Yeah. So I mentioned, one of the examples of our pre-college programs. So typically 10th, 11th, and 12th graders who are coming to us for 2-week immersive experiences. New York City is one of our big hubs where students can come to the School of the New York Times. They can come to our Vogue summer school that we run there that just launched last year. This year in its second year. We also have a Sotheby's Institute of Art Summer Institute. So these are all programs that high school students can take advantage of. And these 2-week immersive experiences, for many of them, if you just listen to the student experiences, read the comments they make when they fill out forms about their experience, they talk about how it is truly transformative, right? That they're doing things that don't feel or look or act like school in the traditional sense to them. They're getting involved in hands-on projects. They're getting to understand the various jobs and roles that exist within an industry. They're getting to understand the industry and some of the lingo and some of the things that would be valuable in an interview process. And they're importantly discovering, what they're interested in, which helps them zero in on what they want to major in college. So, that's a quick example of the pre-college programs. We're also running collegiate programs that are 4-week summer programs for undergrads who are interested in the same types of things, right? So we have a Manchester City Sports Business School program in Manchester. We also just launched a new program with Wired, which is one of the Condé Nast brands that's going to be a
Yep.
Wired and Tech program for college students. But again, the same fundamentals, right? They're being taught by industry experts and educational experts together. They're working on hands-on projects. They're getting iterative feedback on those projects. They're getting to access people who are in the industry and build a Rolodex of contacts, right? And then importantly, they leave an experience like this, they put it on their resume, and it stands out as one of the most iconic aspects of their resume. These are brands that are, again, world renowned, brands that are the top of the field in their particular industry. And when a student can say, hey, I'm thinking about majoring in journalism, for example, and I went to the School of the New York Times, that really is something that stands out on their resume. So there's a lot of really neat things that are happening as part of that. That's just a quick, overview of our pre-college and collegiate programs.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thanks for explaining that. And I'm trying to relate all of this to traditional higher ed, where most of my listeners are coming from. Like, what are parts of this partnering with brands do you think traditional higher ed can take from? And one example comes to mind is University of Oregon and Eugene has some partnerships with Nike locally, because I believe that's where they're based out of. So like that's one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
But like I still don't think they like really market that. At least I haven't done any research, so I'm coming um, to this with no information. But
Yeah.
what are some ways that institutions can partner?
Well, look, I think there's a number of examples like the one you just mentioned where there is a particular program or a particular class or whatever it might be where there's an industry partner. It may be a for-profit entity or a nonprofit organization, right? I think all of the above are welcome. Where there's some contribution from that industry partner in the form of staff who come and teach in it. They provide, the grist for a case study or some sort of project-based learning for a student. I'm a huge fan of all of that, whether it's, a shorter term type of project or something that might actually be longer term. I mean, obviously, there's internship opportunities that some students have access to. I think the big challenge, though, as I think about internships, is that although there's huge demand for them, there's no evidence to suggest that internships are scalable, right? So there were about 8.2 million college students this year who wanted an internship. Only 3.6 million had one. And of those, only 2.5 million had what was deemed a quality experience with that internship. So first thing, they don't scale. Second thing, that they're not always high quality. But I think the more that we can create connections between industry, organizations of all shapes and sizes, and higher ed, it's going to be really beneficial for students. If you look at their long-term outcomes in work or life, some of the critical aspects that they experience during college that double the likelihood that they're successful in work and that they're thriving in their well-being are work integrated learning opportunities. Did they have an internship where they were able to apply what they were learning in the classroom? Did they work on a long-term project that took a semester or more to complete? So any way that universities are finding opportunities to create those types of things, it's going to be a win for students and a win for the institution. And I think as it relates to, working with brands, even if it's a simple step like embedding a case study, right? Thinking about how to involve, an industry expert in the co-creation of a particular piece of a course, maybe not the whole course, but a component of it. All those things I think are going to be really valuable. And then I think to your point, I think there's a bigger set of ideas around, do we have partnerships where we can leverage the brand of a great organization with the brand of our university? And I think that's a new, early, nascent, part of the field, an area where brand ed has been, a real true pioneer. But I can certainly see how individual institutions can take advantage of that. I mean, we're in the middle of conversations right now with colleges and universities that want to work with us to co-brand aspects of their program with the organizations that we work with. So I can certainly see a huge appetite for this and more interest in universities to really make it happen.
That's fantastic. Thanks for all those examples. I'd love to dive deeper and get more granular with the pre-college programming. I actually didn't really know too much about this before speaking with you. So first off, thank you for letting
Yeah.
me understand what this is all about. So you kind of already explained what pre-college education is, right? It's for the 10, 11, 12th graders to get some fundamentals, maybe take a 2-week course to understand a little bit more about the job, industry, a specific role. But I'd love to hear what your students are saying about these courses. What's some of the feedback you've heard as you've been on have had some boots on the ground?
Yeah. So look, as I mentioned, I try and take time to, sit in the courses and, go on some of
Hmm.
the field programs and components of it myself. We also spend a lot of time making sure we're, getting feedback from students on the program, and quantitative and qualitative. And, I think, look, one of the real, there's a handful of things that are constantly referenced by students. And I sort of mentioned it earlier, that they'll start to describe an experience with brand ed as something that is unlike anything else they've ever done. Some of them have had an internship or they've had a paid job, but they're like, I learned more in the 2 weeks of this program than I have in, my entire time as an intern or my entire time working in X or Y. And they also
Hmm.
describe it as fundamentally different than school. So there's certainly pieces of it that are academic familiar, right? There's classroom time and there's projects that they work on, and there's some form of grading or a rubric for evaluation. So they're familiar with those things, but it just feels different. It's more exciting. It's interesting, engaging. And one of the things that we hear from all the time is students who come and say, well, I was interested in fashion, or I was interested in art, or I was interested in sports, but I never realized all the different roles and jobs that existed in that industry. So that's a really interesting one, because we have multiple experts who are involved in co-teaching these programs. The students don't only just get to hear about the industry and learn more about art or auction world, right? But they're understanding that there's all kinds of different jobs in these industries, right? Way beyond what they initially probably knew or understood. And so that understanding is a really big part of it. They're also starting to build a Rolodex. They're meeting people. They're getting recommendation letters from Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, who were faculty for them in the School of New York Times program. So those are a lot of the key components, but they love being able to do any kind of real hands-on type work. They love to be able to connect with real people who are in these jobs currently, right, and can speak to their experience and provide, some really helpful insight and perspective to students. And so I think, those are all things that are really, really powerful parts of it. And then I'll just say this. There's also just things that you can't fully explain, like the difference between being able to actually walk into the Etihad Stadium and see it in person, right? To be able to touch that. I mean, we're delivering plenty of really valuable online experiences as part of what we're doing as well. But for those students that can actually touch the mothership in that situation, or they visit the New York Times headquarters, or they go to a Sotheby's auction house, those are things that students just think of as signature experiences in their, in their lives. And so there's so many aspects of it that I think are really powerful. But I would say if I boil it down to what we've honed in on most in terms of a pedagogy is how we co-create and co-teach everything between an industry expert and educational experts. That partnership is where so much magic happens. And it's different, I'll say, Shiro, than the typical example of, I'll say, a faculty member who invites a guest lecture in. They do a one-time 40-minute guest lecture from an industry expert or whatever. Mm-hmm. Usually there's not a lot of pre-thought put into what is that topic? How does it gel with what we're already learning? How do we have time to interact with the students? It's usually a lecture, it's delivered, and they're gone. This is way different than that, right? This is actually thinking about what are the experiences we're going to create with the students, where that industry expert and that educational expert are working together and then delivering it together. That's where there's a lot of magic. And I would suggest that any college or university, if they put some elbow grease behind that kind of effort, they can go make that kind of stuff happen just as easily.
Yeah, I like the tips. Thank you so much. That's great. And I believe the stadium you're in reference to is the Manchester City football team stadium, right?
You got it. Yeah. So
okay,
I should have made that super clear. But yeah,
we
work with only one football partner, and Man City is it. So yeah, Etihad Stadium is their mothership stadium. So
that's amazing. Yeah, I've never been, but I know they're becoming a stronger brand in the recent years. So it's probably very, very exciting. So no, this is really fantastic. And then I know you just gave some tips to traditional higher ed, about how you can adopt bits and pieces of this. But like my question when listening to all this is industry experts, right? Like, for example, like I'm a demand gen marketer. That's my expertise. Now, if I were to go ahead and teach a class on this, it might take me some time to get there. Like, how do you partner with the actual industry experts to get them to become educators as well? Like, do you just have to find the right people? Like, what's that process been like? Because I think there's got to be some time to learn how to educate as well.
Yeah, look, there's real work involved there, right? It isn't as magic wand waving as mm-hmm. some would hope it is, where you just invite somebody in and they do their thing. I think this won't surprise you or anybody listening. There's a lot of folks in jobs that industry experts who aren't very good at teaching, right? They aren't very engaging. Their style is not really exciting. They haven't thought carefully about, like, hey, what would a 16-year-old student really like to know? How can I connect and relate to them? And then also they're not thinking about, how can I create this as something where there might be reflective exercises as part of it, right? Building some of the educational rigor components around it in a way that make it a more meaningful experience and ensure that it's a consistently high quality experience. So, we do a number of things. We'll do training for industry experts on how to deliver a great class, right? Certain tips and things not to do. We'll also have our education partners work with them, again, as a partner in helping craft the syllabus, right? And the content. And some of that will be done by the educator with some guidance from the industry expert. And in some cases, it's the educator saying, hey, it would be great if you could include a case study or an example like this. And with some prompting, the expert goes, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, right? So it's that connection between the two. But if you are left with just an educator who hasn't been in the industry, who hasn't been in a role, these are really smart people, but they don't fully grasp all the nuances. And then the industry expert, obviously, in many cases, some are naturally great teachers, but they're few and far between. They usually need some support, some guidance. And then once they've been involved in programs, they quickly get pretty smart about it in terms of how to do great teaching, if we want to use that as one of the descriptors. So once somebody's done one or two of these programs with us, we have a lot who are eager to come back, the industry experts, that is, who are eager to come back, keep doing it more. It gets easier and easier and more natural for them. But it's not as simple as just plugging in people and assuming that it's going to work.
No, I really, really like this. And I do think that once you become an expert in a specific topic or industry or role, like there is a feeling that you want to give back a little bit. Like at some point, I'm a part of, who knows, maybe 10 different marketing Slack groups. And half the time I'm not reading, I'm just answering people with their questions they have on how to spend money on LinkedIn ads, for example.
Yeah.
And so like, you do want to be a part of community. So I think this is just the longer game of that. And so it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And
Appreciate
you're
that.
right. You made this point, like almost everybody who is on the industry expert side of our teams that teach, they all exactly what you said. They feel like it's their opportunity to give back for the experiences they've had, right, to teach the next generation of folks in the industry. They're also usually very passionate about the industry they're in, and they're passionate about the organizations they work for, and so they look at the opportunity to teach, interact with students as a real pay it forward type of moment. And especially in industries where, like, take journalism, the farm system, so to speak, has evaporated, right? A lot of smaller local news and media organizations have gone out of business. And so the way to do talent development in journalism is not as clear as it was decades ago, when you had a lot of opportunities as a young budding journalist to get experience, right, and then work yourself up the ranks into some of the major national publications. It doesn't really exist anymore, right? So those who are in the field recognize that they are more eager to contribute to teaching and supporting the next generation. So I think that's a really cool part of what we do, is that we see joy in the faces of our teachers and industry experts. It's not just the students; everybody's getting something out of it.
No, this is great. And you're so right. The pathway to careers has changed over the last 50 years. So the educational models also have to change as well. I like it. Um, well, switching gears quite a bit from our previous topic here. I know when we first chatted, we talked a little bit more about the business front, about education, and really how it's important to understand CAC. So could you first explain what CAC is? Just spell it out for us and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a common business term, obviously less so in higher ed, but it's as relevant to higher ed as it is any type of organization. And it's really your cost to acquire a customer. In this case, the cost of acquiring a new student. And so, we use other terminology that everybody's familiar with: enrollment management and marketing, right? That is one of the parts of the organization that's heavily involved in CAC. And so, it goes all the way up the gamut, though, to how are you leveraging alumni for word of mouth referrals, right? Not just for their own children, but to what degree do you have raving fan alums who are telling prospective students and their parents, oh, you really want to go to X or Y college? And so it's not just the pure enrollment management, marketing, advertising function. It's really multiple components of the university. But in effect, if you think about it in terms of the business model of higher education, this is true in education writ large, whether you're a nonprofit organization, a for-profit. The cost of acquiring a new student has gone up incredibly over the last 10 or 15 years. In fact, it's one of the most unsustainable increasing costs right now in higher ed. And that's why it's important that any institution, whether they use the term CAC or not, really think carefully about how much are we spending to gain a net new student enrollment, right? And if that is, for example, think about some ratios. If that's 10% of the total revenue I get from tuition, that's a really good CAC ratio, right? If it's 50%, that's a really troubling ratio. You're probably on your way to going out of business, because your cost of acquiring a student is ultimately higher than you're able to support the growth of that incremental enrollment. So that really becomes pretty key. And then, of course, the strategies for how can I acquire new students without spending money I can up my social media advertising or Google AdWords search budget, or, I can invest in billboards and radio, right? Those are things that always cost real dollars. Some of them are really important yield drivers, but you say, okay, what are some of the other ways in which I can attract a student that don't really cost me hard dollars, right? So that's where the alumni word of mouth, or getting your faculty more prominently featured. Can I offer short courses for free from my faculty, where a
Mhm.
student's like, oh my gosh, I want to take a course with Professor so and so at University X, right? And so there are a whole bunch of ways that I think universities have largely left untouched in the spirit of driving down the cost of acquiring a new student. And it's beyond just thinking about the hard dollar spend solutions that we think about very traditionally.
Oh, that's really good, and I love that you've taken it outside of just enrollment marketing and paid channels, because I think, going back to our prior conversation, I believe word of mouth is actually a huge driver for a lot of your pre-college programs, right? And that is compounded on not marketing you're doing for those programs, but a lot of it's just the value in the programs you provide, and that's compounding to friends telling friends or family telling friends.
Absolutely, right. You think about it, like we will in higher ed, we'll use terms like student satisfaction, or we'll talk about high impact practices, right? What are the things that actually move the needle on word of mouth, right? The likelihood that me as a student or me as an alum goes and says to somebody else, like,
Hmm.
oh, yeah, you really want, my alma mater is Duke University. You really want to go to Duke because of X, Y, or Z, right? And it's not, but here's the point: universities really don't use the terminology word of mouth. They haven't really attached to a metric like NPS, Net Promoter Score, which is a common customer satisfaction metric in business. The reason why a lot of businesses care about it is because the higher the NPS score, the more somebody spends with you as an organization, right? And so there's a real business return on investment linked to higher NPS scores. NPS scores and word of mouth are very related, right? If a student had an incredible experience, they're more likely to tell friends about it. If they had a truly life-changing experience, they can't help but not tell other people about it. And I think that's what I was most attractive to me when I chose to come work at Brand Ed a year ago. Is I looked at the programs and I said to myself, I've never seen anything like this. These are the most engaging, exciting, industry immersive programs I've ever seen. Compliments I paid to the organization before I joined it, right? So this is not me complimenting anything to my leadership over the last year, but it's very much about the model. It's about the brands that we work with. It's about the incredible experiences. And I'll just give you an example. Last summer was the first summer that we launched Vogue Summer School for high school students, right? The students that were there had an incredible experience. Several of them talked about that experience on social media channels, and a
Hmm.
couple of those went truly viral. And it wasn't like they were just like, hey, Vogue Summer School is awesome. They were talking all about it. They were talking about what they had done, the projects they worked on, the friends they made, the people they met in the industry. And there's no doubt in my mind, Shiro, that our growth right now in enrollment this summer is being driven in large part to the outstanding word of mouth and then the viral promotion of that from students who are there. So, our students who experience the program have now become some of the biggest promoters, and that should be what colleges and universities strive for. It's not just graduation rates, graduating in a place where you're like, that was amazing. And I have to tell everybody else about it.
Yeah, this is so fascinating, and I'm so excited for everything to come with pre-college programming. Like I just feel like this is a huge untapped market. So really excited. I'm very happy you explained CAC too, because we everything is based on numbers in marketing as well, right? We have to figure out how much we pay for things, we turn campaigns off, and so really understanding your customer acquisition cost is so key to what I do in my day to day. And so I think is if you're in marketing, whether that's in higher ed or in higher ed SaaS, it doesn't matter. It's very important. So really appreciate those points.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, and look, if you don't, if you're in higher ed, you don't like the term CAC or customer acquisition cost, come up with a different name for it, but like understand that it's a fundamental driver of long-term success. So, but put the names aside. If the name bothers you, just, don't lose track of the fundamental behind it.
No, I appreciate this. Well, I think we're just at about time here. I'm wondering where our listeners can follow up with Brand Ed and you, Brandon.
Yeah, so look, we're just engaging in a number of partnership discussions for the first time with colleges and universities to help support their students coming into industry immersive education programs that we're running. So now is a good time to begin some conversations with us. We're at branded-edu.com, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, Brandon Busteed. I'm the only Brandon Busteed on LinkedIn, so I should be easy to find.
Well, thank you, Brandon, so much. It's been an awesome conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, and really appreciate all the great questions.